You know that thing you do sometimes where you go completely quiet, not because you're sad, not because something's wrong, but because your brain just needs to think? Where you'll sit with a cup of tea that goes cold because you got lost in a thought you didn't even mean to start following? Most people around you probably don't do that. They fill silence with noise. They scroll when they're bored. They need the TV on in the background just to feel okay. But you go somewhere else, alone, on purpose, and nobody really tells you what that means. So you file it under quirky or introverted or a bit weird and move on. But here's what I want to ask you. What if that thing you do, that quiet, solitary, slightly odd habit, and actually one of the clearest signals of a rare kind of intelligence? Not the school test kind, something harder to measure and honestly harder to find. Stay with me. The version of smart we were all sold. Here's what the world has taught you. Intelligence looks like loud confidence in a meeting, fast answers, the person who always knows the trivia, the one who wins arguments because they can talk quickly and cite things on the spot. That's the version of smart we've all been sold. And if you're not that person, if you're slower, quieter, more internal, you've probably spent a lot of your life feeling like you're slightly behind. But that story is built on a very narrow, very outdated idea of what intelligence actually is. It was designed for classrooms and boardrooms and systems that reward performance over depth. And it missed something enormous. The kind of intelligence we're talking about today doesn't show up loudly. It shows up in what you choose to do when no one is watching, in the habits you've developed almost by accident when you're alone. Those habits aren't random. They're not personality quirks. They are, according to decades of psychological research, markers of cognitive depth that most people genuinely never develop. And here's the part that might sting a little. The fact that you've never been rewarded for these things doesn't mean they don't exist. It means the world measuring you didn't have the right tools. When time disappears and no one is watching, let's start with something a researcher named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent his entire career studying. You've probably heard the word flow. That state where you're so absorbed in something that time disappears and everything outside the task becomes irrelevant. Csikszentmihalyi wasn't just describing a nice feeling, he was identifying something neurologically significant. What he found was that people who regularly enter flow states, especially during solitary, self-directed activity, show patterns of deep attentional control that are genuinely rare. Your brain is doing something most brains resist, sustaining focused engagement without external reward, without an audience, without someone telling it the work matters. Think about what you do alone that pulls you in. Maybe it's reading something obscure for no reason other than you got curious. Maybe it's working through a problem in your head during a long walk. Maybe you rearrange your entire thinking on a topic you've held for years because you read one sentence that cracked it open differently. That is flow. Quiet, unspectacular, and cognitively demanding in ways that outperform almost any group brainstorm. The person who can go deep, alone, without applause, Csikszentmihalyi's research suggests that person has developed something genuinely unusual, not better than others, but rarer. The uncomfortable thing your mind does in silence. Now here's where it gets more specific. Psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman, who has spent years redefining what intelligence means beyond IQ, identified something he calls openness to experience as one of the strongest predictors of creative and intellectual depth. And crucially, openness to experience isn't about being adventurous in the social sense. It's about what happens inside your head when you're alone. People high in this trait do something particular in solitude. They observe their own thoughts rather than just having them. They'll notice they're feeling something and get curious about why. They'll start a mental argument with themselves about a belief they've Held for years, they'll sit with the discomfort of not fully understanding something rather than just moving on. This is called metacognition, thinking about your own thinking, and Kaufman's work shows it's one of the clearest markers of high-functioning intelligence, not the performing kind, the processing kind. And here's what makes this uncomfortable to say out loud. Most people avoid this entirely, not because they're lazy, but because being truly alone with your own mind, without distraction, without escape, is genuinely hard. It surfaces things, it asks questions without clean answers. The people who do it anyway, who sit in that discomfort and keep thinking, they're building a cognitive muscle that looks completely invisible from the outside. Before we go any further, a honest thing, but I want to be honest about something because this is the part most videos like this quietly skip over. These traits, the solitary thinking, the internal depth, the tendency to go quiet and process, they can also be a hiding place. Sometimes what looks like deep reflection is avoidance. Sometimes the person who prefers their own company isn't building inner richness. They're protecting themselves from something they don't want to face. The line between a rich inner life and a closed-off one is real, and it's not always obvious from the inside. So this isn't a video that's going to tell you that everything you do alone is secretly genius. Some of it is. Some of it might be fear wearing the costume of depth. The honest work is learning to tell the difference, and that's not comfortable, but it's necessary. Two people who both sit alone. Because when you look at people who regularly do things alone, who think alone, who create alone, who question alone, there are really two very different versions of that person. The first type is alone because connection feels unsafe. Somewhere early in their life, they learned that other people were unpredictable or critical or exhausting in a way that made solitude feel like relief. Their inner life became a refuge. And refuge is real. It kept them sane. But over time, the walls they built for safety became walls that kept everything out, including growth. Their intelligence curls inward and never reaches anything or anyone. They get smarter in theory and quieter in practice. The second type is alone because they're genuinely building something. Their solitude is generative. They go inward and come back out with something changed, an idea, a shift in perspective, a question they bring back into the world. They're not hiding. They're composting. They take in experience, sit with it, and return different in some small way that eventually matters. Both types look almost identical from the outside. Both spend time alone. Both think deeply. But one is circling and one is slowly spiraling upward. And the difference almost always comes down to whether their inner life is in conversation with the world or sealed off from it. The unglamorous version of all of this. Here's the small, undramatic truth underneath everything I just said. The real sign of this kind of intelligence isn't that you have profound thoughts. It's that you notice when your thinking is wrong and you bother to correct it, even when no one asked you to. Even when there's no reward, it happens in moments nobody sees. You catch yourself assuming something about a person, and you pause and ask where that assumption came from. You change your mind about something you said 3 days ago, and you sit with the mild embarrassment of having been wrong rather than pretending you never said it. You feel uncomfortable with an answer that's too easy and you don't accept it, even though accepting it would be so much faster. Nobody applauds that. There's no metric for it. It won't impress anyone at dinner, but it is quietly one of the rarest things a human mind can actually do, update itself honestly in private. For the person who thinks this still isn't enough, and if you're watching this thinking, okay, but I do all of these things and my life still feels small, my ideas feel stuck, nobody still really sees me. I hear that. That's a real thing to feel. This kind of intelligence doesn't come with a built-in audience. It doesn't automatically translate into the kind of success the louder version sometimes does. That's a genuine unfairness, and I'm not going to dress it up as something it isn't. But I will say this: the gap between having a deep inner life and having that inner life actually means something in the world. That gap is closable, not by performing more, not by pretending to be someone else, by slowly, imperfectly learning to bring what lives inside you outward. Through one conversation where you say the real thing instead of the safe thing, through one piece of work that carries something true in it, you're not behind, you're just still mostly living on the inside of yourself. That's not a dead end, it's a starting point. The last thing. The rarest kind of intelligence isn't the kind the world applauds. It's the kind that keeps quietly working even when no one is watching. Leave this here before you go. What's one thing you do alone? Something small, something you've never really named out loud, that you now think might actually say something about how your mind works? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this kind of psychology speaks to something in you, Psyche and Reality is here every week for people who think a little too much and feel a little too deeply.